Okay, welcome to the next one. So this is kind of where the pavement hits the road and all the things we talked about, all the stuff that's happening to the body, like where does it actually come into play into like you and your world and kind of how all this came about. Short story or short version is in a way you kind of did it to yourself, um, but you didn't know you were doing it, and it's not a bad thing. But again, it's you learn how to push, but you didn't learn how to unpush. But that's okay. That's why we're here. So this is just to kind of learn about kind of the systems and habits that tend to kind of get a lot of people in the burnout phase. Again, because you want to be able to recognize this stuff so we can alter it moving forward. Okay, um, burnout. It's not weakness. It's not, you know, I was in my prime and now I can't do stuff. It's not that, Johnny and Billy are better than me because they're 20 years younger or any of that bullshit. It's your body is stressed and overloaded and not running as effectively as it should per the stuff that we've already talked about. Um, and if you don't know what we've already talked about, pause, go watch the other videos, watch the brain stuff, watch the body stuff. You need to know how this is operating inside of you. But this is more kind of the outside stuff, the patterns and habits and stuff that kind of fed in to what's happening over there and causing all the havoc. Um, so a big myth with burnout is, they weren't tough enough. They broke down. They needed better boundaries. They didn't take care of, what they should have done. Or, my least favorite one is they should have never stopped and they should have just kept pushing and they would have been fine. I don't understand why they they put their head up to catch air and then they realized they were burnt out and bad and then they just fell apart. Um, all that is raging bullshit, pardon my French. Um, what actually is true is that there's a trait inside of you in an environment, what's around you, typically your work, and that kind of balance. And that's what we're really looking at and kind of seeing what's happening there. So the traits you were selected for, problem solver, hardworking, loyal, empathetic employees, whatever the things, um, generally allowed you to push well and do well in your career. But again, it tends to be the opening of the door to the trip to burnout. Because if you can't compensate, if you can't balance those things, if you can't turn those things off and on, the things that got you started in your career are the things that are going to push you into the burnout. Um, and again, it's twofold. It's the trait and the environment. So it's again, it's the motivation, the drive, the problem solving, all the skills that you have on top of, not on top of, inside of the system that you're operating in. Whether you're an entrepreneur and it's a system you built yourself, which be careful, really careful. You folks definitely should be talking to me because there's all kinds of stuff about the systems to help support all this stuff to keep it from happening to you and everybody else that's working for you. Because you can imagine if you have a whole team of people that are watching these videos, your business is probably suffering pretty hard. Um, and then, on the other side, working inside hospitals, military folks, all that kind of stuff. Not all work environments are designed to keep you happy and healthy. Um, and burnout is the combination of those two interacting in unhealthy, unbalanced ways. So again, the traits, the parts of you that kind of set yourself up for failure. And again, it's not that you're a failure. It's not that these traits are unhelpful. It's not that these traits are bad. It's how they're used and when they're used. Time and a place for everything. Too much of anything is bad. You can drown yourself drinking water, sitting in a chair. Um, too much of anything is unhealthy. Life is balance. Your body is balance. Um, So the conscientiousness, which I never say quite right, so just bear with me. High follow through, high standards, own what you need to do what they say they're going to do, um, tend to carry more than you're given. You know, you get assigned this level, you decide to push it to this level to prove that you can do it, do a better job, push past the person next to you, whatever your motivation. Um, with that, Backing that up is the achievement drive. So you tend to be goal oriented. You count your wins. You're built to move up, and you want to constantly move up. As soon as you see the opportunities, you're moving forward. With that, what you're aiming for tends to also move with you, and it gets really hard to catch, and you end up in this constant chase. Um, Folks in this part also tend to get to the low self compassion. It's easier to forgive others than themselves. Anything that happens inside of this chase, they tend to own, take all the blame for it. And what's worse is they don't slow down to process it, think about it, let the emotions go. It all starts building up, and it just turns into weight that's holding you down as you're trying to hit this unending race, anyways. And you can see where this starts getting really kind of layered and messy. So that's the trait side, that's the you side. The environments that tend to be really unhealthy and support burnout. Workload climbs while you sleep, downtimes, rhythms shrink, aka you're always trying to push towards getting work done, you're working after hours, you're taking phone calls at 9 o'clock on the weekends, all those kind of things. Your body never gets a chance to turn off. There's never a safe period where you're separate from the performance. Um, Not good. We need to work on that. Um, Low control. Typically, a lot of people with high responsibility, especially on the lower rungs, building up again as you're pushing through into the higher rungs. You had a lot of responsibility. You took on a lot of responsibility, but you didn't have a lot of authority. You were working inside of somebody else's systems, inside of somebody else's plans. Um, the decisions that you make are kind of yours, kind of not. It gets to be this really messy push pull of trying to like push against the barriers, sometimes trying to figure out the barriers. And it leads to feeling like everything's unfair. And sometimes, in a lot of ways, it is. Recognition may be down, promotions may be down. If you're pushing after that goal all the time and you're moving that bar all the time, you don't feel like you ever get it. And depending on your system is, they might keep it from you to try to keep you chasing. Some people consider that a motivator to make you work harder, better, longer. And it works for a moment, but eventually, again, you have to be able to achieve something. You have to be able to rest. Otherwise, burnout happens, and all of a sudden, none of it matters anymore. And then, yeah, and this you can see ultimately is where the trust in the system kind of erodes. And if you're feeling bad about yourself from the trait part, and your system trust in the system is wearing down at the same time, like you got nothing left to work with. So a couple combinations of trait and environment interactions and kind of what they cause. So if you have not a lot of push and not a lot of drive, and the environment's not trying to push you, minimal strain, typical work stress, you shouldn't be. And again, when we're talking about drive and pushing and kind of stuff like that, we're talking about more unhealthy versions. There is healthy versions of drive. There is healthy versions of push. We all know this. Don't want to take that away. Want to help you lean into that stuff. Um, but when it gets pushed past the point that you can handle it or that you can recover from it, that's what we're talking about. So those lower traits and lower stresses into the healthier levels is what a resilient baseline comes from. You're able to go up and down and move freely because the system's not pressing you down the whole time. You're not pressing yourself down the whole time. So high trait, you push yourself super hard. Low environment, the system doesn't push you super hard. Um, that's kind of ideal for people that want to succeed. You're pushing yourself hard. You're doing well. The system's not pushing back against you. You're moving up. Everything's kind of okay. The system's not leaning on you. So even though that you're pushing, you have the flexibility and the freedom inside of that system to take breaks, to rest, and you can keep that momentum going in a healthy manner. This is ideally what we're trying to set up as best as we can with whatever system you're in. Low trait, so not a lot of motivation internally. High environment, works like, need you to do this, need you to do this, need you to do this. And you're just like, you're not a self-motivator that's going to push that hard. It's where a lot of turnover comes out. People just exit that system super fast because they can't deal with it and they don't want to. And then people that push hard inside of systems that push hard is, Burnout 101. That's where it lives because the pressure just compounds. It sits, it's steady, it comes from inside and outside, and it just never goes away. It's relentless. And this is what we need to be able to figure out how to push back against because that amount of pressure for that amount of time, you're feeling it. You are. Otherwise, you wouldn't be here. And if we don't do something about it, it's not going to get better on its own. So, everybody's favorite story. You've probably said this to yourself a bazillion times, and most of the time you were probably right, but not every time. And just because you can't handle it doesn't mean you should. That's the kicker. Um, yeah, just because you can push through something, like you really have to push through something. Like we need to get you to slow down and start actually asking that question a lot. But that'll come later. So the I can handle it story, where this gets kind of perpetuated and it becomes more and more true, is in the past. Um, you've walked this path. You've said this before. You did handle it. And the fact that you were able to handle it and that you have handled it in the past, it starts becoming a part of who you are and what you do, and you're the person that can handle it. It becomes part of your identity. We talked about this a little bit before. But this is also where kind of the handcuffs, the chains, the cement boots start coming into this whole system. Um, is because you start shifting your identity, the sense of who you are, into the profile of burnout to try to keep pushing through it. And this is where it starts getting kind of nasty, and the more horrible things and unpleasant things that we've talked about start kind of coming into the picture. Um, Again, a good early warning sign of this is, you're just used to being tired. It's just part of the process. It's just who you are. You're working super hard. Of course, you're going to be tired. Um, Everybody's supposed to be tired at times, not all the time. And then asking for help feels like weakness. It feels like you're not handling enough. It feels like somebody else is going to slide in and take over what you're doing. Um, and you're afraid any kind of help is going to let them see weakness or let them take what you have, those kind of things. It's a really unhealthy place to be. Nobody gets through life on their own. You have to feel safe enough to be able to ask for help for things at times, um, especially inside of systems. Like, I realize a lot of you probably aren't in systems where that feels safe, and we should have that talk. But for you to be able to get through work, for you to be able to have a career, for you to be able to be human, to be a part of your family, like you have to be in systems at home and at work where you can ask for help. It has to exist. If it doesn't, if none of these things are in place, the cost turns to be, again, the early load signs, the early stressors on your body, your biology. Sleep goes down, mood starts turning to crap. You start getting super reactive, super emotional things. Um, these start getting looked at as weakness. Any kind of a pause to push past it feels like it's going to get out of control and just pile up. So you stop even trying to look for breaks. Breaks become weakness because you just need to keep grinding. Like, all these are things that you've probably said to yourself, probably at least twice. Um, but every time you think this stuff, your brain hears it and it starts believing it. And if you remember from the first couple lessons, your brain, your body learns on repetition. Every time you say something, it adds. There's a value to it that your body holds. You've got to be really careful on the stories that you tell yourself. We'll get into that part later, but like, having those rumination thoughts can get really heavy really, really fast. You got to be careful on what you're telling yourself about how to deal with this stuff. Which again is why we're explaining all this stuff so much, so that we can help that narrative part, along with finding the proper solutions. And by the time you do stop, it's usually because you're forced to, and your body is just collapsing, and you just don't have a choice, which clearly is unhealthy and not what we want. We want you to be able to say, like, I'm going to stop for the afternoon, the day, the week, and then go back to doing what you need to do. Okay, so again, this is that identity shift, which is really, really dangerous. We need to make sure that some of you are here. It's okay. We can push back against it, but those of you that aren't here or like moving along the path, the faster we can realize this and push back, the better. So again, the story that you're telling yourself, I'm the operator, I'm the founder, I'm the one that has to fix it. I can't take a break. I'm the only one that gets stuff right. I'm the only one that cares. Um, you know, all those things. I know there's truth in some of those. Um, but again, the more that you repeat that self, the more that it becomes a constant truth inside of your head with no other options, and you start losing your choice, which is where it gets dangerous. Um, with all that pressure, with all that self speak, your options, your ability, your want to rest, work with relationships, do hobbies and things that you enjoy, all that stuff starts to diminish. And then all of a sudden, the core comes in, that identity shifts. You're no longer the person that has the hobby. You're no longer the person that jogs. You're no longer the person that cooks. You're no longer the person that works on cars. You're the person that's always at work, always stressed, just trying to deal with your family enough that they don't bother you so you can get back to work to get stuff done because you're climbing the ladder, you're taking care of the things, you're earning the money. That's who you are. And eventually, that's all that you have left. Um, and that is about one step before burnout. Because at that point, there's nothing else to work with to help regulate that stress and pressure. Because you have told yourself that that is where you're supposed to be, and that's where you live, and that's who you are. And identity shifts are really hard, and breaking those down get really scary for folks. I don't care how much of a badass you are. Nobody likes their identity getting fucked with. Um, but we can have those conversations and we can work on it if that's where you're at, because it can be done. It's just not something most people enjoy and they tend to fight about. Um, but again, very, very workable. Um, and again, the whole point of educating all this stuff is hopefully being able to see where and why that came from, and the slow build up, because people don't see how this stuff happens. It's gradual. It's 1,000, 10,000, 100,000 tiny little choices that all piled up that you never even saw coming. Okay, so clearly certain jobs tend to be more of the burnout profile than others. And again, it's that trait environment. Some jobs look for high trait and high environment. Military, obvious. Founders, obvious. Care professionals, at this point, is super obvious. Always on, especially with the way the health system's been working and the fact that more people have been quitting. It's getting harder to get through schools. It's getting more expensive to get schools. So people that care a lot and want to help, they're getting less resources to be able to take care of themselves. And that applies to the founders in the military, also. Um, but again, these three kind of genres of careers um, are precarious for this kind of stuff because, again, they are high trait, high environment careers by design, um, which is part of why I do this work because I'm sure at this point you've seen. It was 21 years Air Force, was in the bomb squad, 3 years combat experience, stuff. Not trying to sound impressive, but I'm trying to say that I've been through this. I understand this stuff. I have lived this stuff more than I care to admit. Um, but the good thing for you is I understand what's happening. I understand why it's doing it, and through my clinical background and through psychology education stuff, like I now understand the biology and the mental functioning and all this stuff that feeds in behind all this stuff, which is why I'm here now. Okay, so again, how do we start kind of rerunning that story and that narrative in your head? Seems silly, seems unimportant, not silly, is important. Just trust me. Um, you're not broken. You're not. This is how bodies work. This is how biology works. This is how a healthy functioning system responds to what you're going through. We need to acknowledge it. We need to be aware of it. And we need you to focus on the steps to push back and to counter it. So things like something's wrong with me, I just need more willpower. I need to try harder. I'm not disciplined enough. I took a break when I shouldn't have, and it's causing, things to fall apart. Like, none of that stuff is true. None of that stuff is healthy. Stop bloody saying it. Um, and when you start saying all this stuff, you start getting shame and stuff like that. And then you start getting socially withdrawn. You stop looking for help. You stop interacting with your family. And again, all that stuff just feeds into what's happening. All of it cuts you out from sources of, help and reprise and healthy things to push back so that you can find the balance so that you can keep pushing without the burnout. Um, so what we're looking for, because this is true, even if it doesn't feel true right now, I don't care. It's true. If you can't believe yourself, believe me, please. It's true. It's true. It's true. You got to this point for a reason. You were strong enough to get here. Your body still holds all those skills, all that knowledge, all that practice, all that experience. You just haven't been turning off the release valve enough. You have an amazing framework, most probably here for you at this point, but you're not using it properly. You know, you're not adding all the tools and skills to keep that balance going. So it's not that you're weak. It's just you're not utilizing all the skills to maintain it. Um, so again, adjust the load, rebuild the recovery. It's about adding in those release valves. It's about adding in you got to turn off your car sometimes. Like things have to rest. You have to repair things. You are no different. Um, and again, as you start saying this stuff more and it seeps into your brain, magical subconscious thing happens, totally different conversations. But when you're like, I'm just in a state where I need some help versus I am weak and broke, I mean, that should feel different, me just saying that. You being overloaded and you being stressed and burnout is something that we can push back on. There's skills for. If you are a broke person, if you are a weak person, if you no longer have what it takes to doing what you're doing, that's an identity shift. That's you telling a narrative where there's no fix for it, which is not true. And we need to fix that piece. The story inside of your head matters a lot. Like a lot, a lot. Okay, that's enough for this one. We're going to start kind of moving into some of the kind of release stuff and kind of where we're moving into a little bit more on the next ones. So again, if all this stuff rings true, a lot of it probably does. Again, it's the process, it's the systems, it's the characteristics that got you here. None of it's inherently bad, but it has slowly worked itself into a not fully functioning state, and you're stuck in one spot of a balance, and we're going to start building in the other part so you can get your balance back.